Today we're going to do a little experiment with yeast. Now yeast is an important part of a lot of breads. Some of you might buy bread at the grocery store in a bag like this. Some of you may have even helped your grown-up make bread at home. And when we make bread at home, we sometimes use yeast. I got my yeast at the grocery store. Yeast is actually a living thing. It is a very simple type of a fungus. Another type of fungus is a mushroom. But what yeast does when you mix it with water and sugar is it actually wakes up and it starts to eat the sugar, and then it makes a gas called carbon dioxide. If you stop for a moment and take a deep breath in and then breathe out, you breathe in oxygen, and then your body changes that to carbon dioxide, and that's what you breathe out. So it's like the yeast are breathing out carbon dioxide. Now, in this experiment today, we're going to think about yeast and water and sugar. So what I did is I took some water. Now the water is very important here because you want the water to be just right. You don't want it to be too hot and you don't want it to be too cold. So you want it to be about 125 degrees. And you can use a thermometer to measure that. So in my experiment today, I'm thinking a little bit about what happens if the water's too hot and what happens if the water's too cold. So I'm going to angle my camera. I mixed together some water, yeast, and sugar in these cups. This is my cup of water and yeast and sugar. This water was too hot. Then I mixed some very cold water with yeast and sugar. This water was too cold. And then I mixed together some water that was just right. And if I hold it like this, maybe you can see there's a layer at the top. And maybe you can see there are lots of bubbles. And we talked about how yeast make carbon dioxide, which is a gas, and that is inside of the bubbles. So if I hold it here, you can see that the cup with the water that's just right has lots of bubbles. The cup with the water that was too cold doesn't look as bubbly. And the cup with the water that was too hot also doesn't have all the bubbles. So this cup that has the just right water, the sugar, and the yeast is nice and foamy. And that is gonna make some yummy bread like this. I'm gonna hold this closer. Do you see all those things that look like little holes in the bread? That comes from the carbon dioxide that the yeast makes. Pretty neat. Now to take it a step further, I was curious, what's the sugar do? So in this cup, I just mixed yeast and water, but no sugar. Now I mentioned how the yeast likes to eat the sugar and turns that into the carbon dioxide. So here is the cup with the yeast and the sugar, and here is the cup with no sugar. So not as many bubbles. So it's kind of fun to do science at home with things that you probably already have. You just have to think about what you want to test. I was curious about the water temperature and the sugar. And I labeled my cups so I would remember what I put in each one. And I also did them at the same time. So I hope you enjoyed this experiment with yeast and sugar and water. And check out the blog for more about bread making.